I would like to start our conversation after the backdrop of Operation Sindoor. I want you, both of you, to tell the audience and the civil population what their role was and their what could have been done better than what happened post Operation Sindoor.
I think Op Sindoor, in my assessment, is a watershed event. And why I say it's a watershed event? Because in a lot of ways, I think it sort of conveyed our resolve to act swiftly, quickly, and in a very assured manner against the scourge of terrorism that has been emanating from across the borders. We all know what happened. I would not go as to what happened, but what happened definitely was a very dastardly act. And what made it even more dastardly was primarily the way the people were picked up before they were killed. I think that sort of understated the intent behind sort of sowing the seeds of playing a divisive kind of a narrative. And so obviously it had to be answered back. And I must say there are certain very important points related with the Op Sindoor. I think for the first time, a very sort of cohesive, very integrated approach where right from the political hierarchy down out to the people who executed it on the ground, I think were very seamlessly integrated. I think that has been one of the most defining moment of it. Another issue is our resolve. This is the time when we didn't sort of go out, we knew what we have to do, and we did, and we went ahead with it. You're all aware that our intent was extremely clear, that we will act against the centers of terrorism. So the Indian armed forces selected the targets which were primarily the militants, terrorist infrastructure, their training camps, their headquarters, and not one or two, but nine of them. And for the first time, also including in Pakistan, Punjab, two of them in Pakistan, Punjab, they were sort of decimated, and the way they were decimated, in the sense that precision fire with minimum collateral damage. That was the so a very clear signal was sent. Not only was a clear signal sent, but it was also reiterated when our own DCMO very categorically mentioned to his counterpart that look, what we have done is against the terrorists, and in no way should Pakistan army get involved in it. And if it gets involved, then the consequences would be disastrous. But we knew what Pakistan would do, and we were prepared for it. And you know how it all sort of played up. Just to summarize, in a matter of merely 88 hours, we got Pakistan onto its knees. So much so that the Pak DCMO has to come, and ask for a ceasefire. Another important event of this is, what our honorable Prime Minister mentioned, that this is an ongoing operation. There is only a pause. Op Sindoor continues, and if an event happened, then it will be replied back in the same way. The way the technology was used was again a very defining moment. So I think, in a nutshell, this is what Op Sindoor sort of defined.
Well said, sir. We'll focus on technology post the opening question, but I'll turn to you, sir. Now, what lessons do you want to tell the audience that the civil population must focus on in a conflict like this that we saw a few months ago?
Well, I think General AK has very rightly talked about the resolve, the precision, and the technology that was used, which is extraordinary. Two more points I would like to add to that is the red lines in the minds have been crossed. In the minds of the decision makers in India, which is what the Prime Minister is or the politicians are, and even the national security managers, was always that if we hit Pakistan's Punjab province, where the terrorist headquarters were located, Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, then Pakistan always threatened the world and India that there will be very harsh consequences to pay. There could be a use of nuclear weapons, even can be contemplated, was used to be the kind of threat that they used to pose to the world. And therefore, everyone was afraid of taking that step. Let me take my mind back to 2000, your minds back to 2008. After the Mumbai attacks in November 2008, when the Air Force had given this option of hitting Bhavalpur, that time the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, was given this option. He deliberated upon it with his team, and they finally said, no, we can't do this because there is a likelihood of a nuclear weapon being used. So that was always the hesitation. In Operation Sindoor, we have cleared that fear from the minds, which is the extraordinary thing to happen, because otherwise Pakistan was always holding India to ransom on that. They would come and attack, they would impose cost, but Pakistan never paid a cost for that. But in Operation Sindoor, this was the main driver. That was the thing. For the citizens like us, what is the lesson? That remember, military doesn't fight the wars alone. It is the nation that fights the war. And if the nation has to fight the war, everyone has to play his or her role. And I'll urge our citizens, our friends here, that please don't treat the war or the visuals of the wars as video games. War is a serious business. There will be losses, there will be deaths, there will be setbacks. But if everyone stands together, we tend to win. And I think that is an extraordinary lesson that we must learn, that unless nation stands as one, we cannot win wars. I mean, you can see this in Ukraine. It's a small country. Russia is a big military power, military industrial power, but for nearly 4 years, it will complete 4 years in February, that war has not concluded because the extraordinary courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people. And India has shown this time and again. I have reported on the Kargil war and other conflicts in the northeast and in Kashmir. It's the people's will. People are the center of gravity. If people support the country, the military, the armed forces, and the government's decisions, I think it's always possible to win from any impossible situation. I think that's the lesson that one must imbibe.
Well said, sir. So we got a good mix of subject matter experts with us. We got an SAB member from whom I'm going to ask more policy-related questions. And of course, we've got a thought leader, and I'm going to ask more about strategic communication from you, sir. Turning towards you, General AK, do you want to tell the audience what is the role of the emerging technology that we see, such as AI and quantum, and how serious is that in the subject of national security at the moment?
Nowadays what is happening is that while the basic, character of the war, normally they say that, it is sort of evolving and it is changing, primarily because it is being driven by the technology. Technology becomes extremely important today. You look at what's happening in Israel, Hamas, you look at what's happening in Russia-Ukraine war. So this is one single most important factor that is playing a very defining and a very, very important role. Now, if you look at the emerging technologies, first and foremost is the drone. I think drone has literally changed how the warfare, in which literally, in fact, very rightly brought about by Nitin, that today every citizen has to play the role of a soldier also. There are soldiers who are fighting in uniform, and I think a normal citizen is also a soldier which is out of uniform. Today, the boundaries are blurred. While the soldiers will fight on the border, but because of the precision strike, because of the long ranges, today any place in a country can be attacked. And if any place can be attacked, then it's become very important for a normal citizen. What is his role? The civil defense organizations again play a very important role. And that's why today, I think I would reiterate your point that today is the time for a complete civil military fusion. It has to be an integrated approach. And that is primarily more important. Coming back to the specific question of the technology, apart from the drone, today the quantum is most important. We are talking of theater commands. We're talking of jointness. In fact, I would say more than the jointness, while jointness is the first stage, but ultimately it has to be integrated. Theatre command are integrated. Unless and until we integrate, and unless and until we are integrated in peacetime, that's when we would be able to bring to forth the combined might of all the three services. If you train together, if you are thinking together, if you are planning together, that is much more easier and axiomatic that you will be able to do a good job, especially in terms of crisis, in times of conflict. So the quantum plays a very, very important role because communication is the backbone. Without communication, you will not be able to bring the entire might together, the entire weight together. And communication have to be secure. Communication have to be assured. Communication also have to be redundant. So all these three are important. Quantum gives you all three. So quantum makes sure that your entire sort of sub systems are properly integrated, and time is of vital importance. Today, what happens is you have to literally shorten your OODA loop. OODA loop is you observe, you orient, you decide, and you act. So you have to be one up on the enemy. You can only be one up on the enemy if you have a secure, assured communication. And quantum definitely would play a very, very important role. Coming up in this artificial intelligence, it's extremely important. Today, I think a leader, military, I have been a Southern Army commander, and Southern Army is the largest command of Indian Army, literally about 41% of Indian landmass. So today, the pace of event would be so much that if you want to do manually, the manual analysis would lag behind. So it's very, very important today to introduce artificial intelligence. We have to make a beginning. And if we make a beginning, then over a period of time, your algorithms would become sharper, would become more intelligent, and would be able to do their job properly. So I think these are all the niche fields in which we have, and I'm very happy to state that I think all the service headquarters, the IDS, the complete MOD, I think we are taking steps in the right direction to make sure. And I think one of the most defining moments would be when we would be able to outline and we will be able to play out the theatre commands in their right form. Thank you.
Absolutely. Since we're pushing for jointness, this is another jointness that we look for.
Absolutely.
So turning towards you, sir, you had a think tank and you also had a multimedia company. How do you see the strategic thought, the strategic communication important when it comes to the media engagement and shaping public understanding of conflicts and the wars that we see around us?
Well, thank you for that question, because one of the key factors in modern wars, as General AK outlined, technology plays a very important role. So even if you look at Operation Sindoor or the Galwan operation, post-Galwan operations in Ladakh, technology has played a major part apart from drones and quantum, space, satellite communication, satellite observation, satellite, the images, sat images that are coming to the military aid in taking decisions faster and correct decisions. Those are the things. Cyber is another. Hypersonics, missiles are playing a major part. If you see, the Indian Air Force jets did not cross the border. So standoff weapons are now becoming, beyond visual range weapons are becoming the weapons of choice as far as wars are concerned. And coming to strategic communication, now strategic communication is another weapon, which includes cognitive warfare. It includes the influence operations, information operations, and the change from the earlier method and systems where media engagement, influence operations, media interaction, or the press conferences used to be an afterthought in the military or even in the governments. Today, you have to do cognitive operations, influence operations, information operations before the war, the kinetic phase of the war begins. It has to be before, during, and after. Extremely important. And without that, I think Joseph Nye said this about 13, 14 years ago, 15 years ago, that today, it is not important how quickly you win a kinetic war. It is more important how you sell your story of winning the war. Because most people are today connected by mobiles and televisions. and they will all believe what appears on their mobile through WhatsApp, through YouTube, through Twitter, through Facebook, and therefore the information warriors are equally important, like the infantry soldiers, like the pilots or the sailors on the ships and aircraft carriers. That is the change that has come in modern wars. Today, how do you pitch your story, and who wins the war is determined by the narrative that is filling our screens, our mobile phone screens, our television screens, and therefore it is important to get the information warriors as our extremely crucial part of any military or any the force that fights the nation's war. I think that has to be kept in mind. That has changed. Today's generation, the Generation Z, and even the older ones are dependent on information which comes to their hand phones or the screens of the mobiles. And if you can't get the story out before your adversary does, then you're only playing catch up. So you have to fill that vacuum. Information, like nature, abhors vacuum, information space.
So you think
And
speed
therefore,
is important.
Speed is important, accuracy is important. You can't be not be credible. And now let me give you an example on what happened on 8th of May. That is one of our weaknesses, and I think we need to take corrective action. On 8th of May, आप सब लोगों ने सुना होगा उस दिन टेलीविजन स्क्रीन पे रात को कराची पे हमला हो गया है, इस्लामाबाद कैप्चर हो गया है. So I'll give you an anecdote. I was sleeping very peacefully, knowing that nothing extraordinary was happening that day. I was woken up by all of you know this program called Lallan Top. I think Saurabh Dwivedi is the anchor, and he I think it's just quits Lallan Top. I got persistent calls from him, about 6-7 calls from his people. So when I picked up ultimately at about 11:30 at night, that fellow on the other side said, "Sir, आप सो रहे हैं? कराची पे हमला हो गया है. इस्लामाबाद कैप्चर हो गया." I said, "It cannot happen. This is not possible." He said, नहीं वो सभी कह रहे हैं. तो I said, मुझे मुंह धो लेने दीजिए, मैं आता हूँ. Then I told them that this is not true. So today misinformation, disinformation has to be captured or countered by credible sources, and that is, I think, the key. And that is where all of us have to play a role. Don't fall to rumors. Don't fall prey to rumors, half information, half baked lies. That is the extraordinary situation that we are in today, where battles are fought in the mind and not just on the battlefield.
Modern warfare is as much about perception than it is about hard power, sir. So from a national security policy perspective, how can AI-driven strategic communication help counter such hostile narratives during conflicts?
I think Nitin has set the stage beautifully for this question to come up. As he said, I would only state and add on that today wars have to be fought and won, not in the physical domain only. It has to be won in the cognitive domain. And cognitive domain in increasingly becoming more important. Nobody knows, nobody is there on the front, or nobody is there where the action is to actually know what's happening there. But everybody knows from their social media, from the Facebook, from the Twitter. So whosoever has the best narrative, whosoever has a faster pace, would be able to get one up. The other side would only keep countering that. So that is actually the most important. And I think that's where the relevance of this particular question becomes extremely important. One, that if you have AI, then it is much more easier to sift through the information that is there. Not only easier, but over a period of time, when you build AI into the database that you have, increasingly your algorithms become much more smarter. They would be able to not only sift, but they will be able to give you correct responses. But even you can't totally sort of depend on the AI. I think a human in the loop is extremely important. That oversight, human oversight, is extremely important. So while AI can do the background work, but I think finally before a narrative is released or a counter is released, it's important that there is a human interface in that. And secondly, I think what Nitin mentioned very correctly is this important of every citizen of our country to actually be aware of what's happening in the strategic domain, in the operational domain, and also at the tactical level. Unless and until every citizen is clear about these facts, you would be very easily misled. Like he said, you can't capture Karachi overnight. or sort of Islamabad overnight. There has to be a well-defined operation. It is a tri-service effort that has to go, and it needs a lot of preparatory time. It needs a lot of time and effort. I'm not saying it cannot be done. It can be done, but there is a method in madness, to that. So it becomes extremely important for every citizen to be well informed. And I'm very happy that we are having this program from the precinct of this international book fair in New Delhi. And the theme is primarily about the military, Indian military, and the stories of valor and wisdom. I think these forums, and like the Chief of Naval Staff also observed correctly, that I see so many footfall of the young generation. I think it's very, very important for the young generation to know about it. And you will only know when you read about it. So I think the universities, the schools must talk about it so that and you can then sift between the truth, half truth, and an absolute utter lie. So I'm absolutely sure and certain that if you put AI into the strategic info space, it'll yield great dividends out of proportions.
Absolutely. Since we're on the subject of AI and we spoke about strategic communication and combating, different narratives through AI, do you want to tell the audience how else can we use AI in military, sir?
Well, AI can be used in multiple ways. In fact, I was at a function yesterday where India's AI gambit was the theme, and whether AI can become the aid and an assistant to everything that India does today to become, as they say, Viksit Bharat by 2047. AI can be used in different ways. It can be used in a destructive way and a constructive way, both. And in the military, I think the AI primarily will be used to hasten decision making, also get a clear picture or a clearer picture of the battlefield faster, because there will be so many inputs coming in, so many data points coming in. AI can easily sift and act faster than human brain in many ways. So the time taken to arrive at a decision is faster. With AI will be made faster. Also, like he mentioned, General AK mentioned that human in the loop is extremely important. So to use AI, you also need intelligent and very balanced people and soldiers, airmen, and the sailors, because without them, AI can be destructive. It can be misleading. So we have to keep that in mind. The other thing is India needs to be a rule shaper and not a follower in AI, because AI is new. A lot of ethical and regulatory frameworks are being put in place the world over. And India needs to be a rule shaper. India needs to be in the room where international rules are framed, international regulations are framed. And that is, I think, where India can play a big role. We are already at number 3 after US and China, but we should aim to become at least number 2, if not number 1, in terms of using AI ethically, using AI with precision, and using AI for the good of the people, apart from the use in the military.
In fact, there is a very interesting piece of information that I want to say, that handling the media and also using the strategic info. Nitin has been our guru for a very long time. He's taught us in higher command, taught us in NDC.
You've been very
Happy
kind.
to share this space with him.
You're being very kind, but I've been extremely lucky to have friends like General AK and so many others in this military across the 3 services, because I get an opportunity to interact with them at various military institutions. And since I've been a journalist and a media person and a strategic communicator for 43 years, I always call my journey from telegram to telegram. I started sending news by telegram, the old Morse code telegram, and today I'm using it on the app, the Telegram app. That is where we are really. But the world has changed. Technology has actually reduced time and space for both the consumers of information as well as purveyors of information. Today we come under extraordinary pressure. Not me so much. I don't do day-to-day reporting or news anymore. I left that 11 years ago when I quit NDTV. But I do not envy my younger colleagues in today's media, where they have to be on top of the game for 24 hours.
More challenging for
More challenging because there's competition. They come under pressure, and AI has also come into that. So, a lot of false news or fake news comes in, fake images come in. And that is where I think the big, good training, balanced mind, and a calm, sort of approach to everything which the military teaches also has to come into the media. That's my thing. So we learn a lot mutually. I mean, if you may have imbibed something from me, but I think I tell my media friends, young media friends, that look at the military, it adapts to everything. It can take on any extraordinary challenge that all of you have done in your life, and they continue to do so far. Being deployed at various difficult areas, very extraordinary courage, not just in sort of killing the enemy, but even the very existence and being deployed at high altitudes, 19, 20, 25,000 feet in Siachen. One has gone there, luckily. One has seen it. So, that's where I think the military and the media and the information space can actually combine to make India stronger.
So, we've got a couple of more questions before we leave for the audience as well. And of course, please keep your questions ready. Sir, you extensively read and write about India's ancient wisdom. What does India's ancient wisdom, like Arthashastra and the Gita, talk about ethical use of emerging technology and AI?
I think it's a very important question. As per the Western, there was one research paper that was written by Rand Corporation at one point of a time, George Denham, and it was mentioned that India lacks strategic culture. How utopian and how false and how ridiculous it can be. But thankfully, Rand Corporation did again another study, and they did come out with this, that India has a strategic culture. I want to tell each one of you, India has a very dynamic, very evolving, very mature strategic culture. And it doesn't date back few hundred years. It dates back 5,000 years. If you go back to, let's say, Ramayana, it is all very clearly articulated and mentioned in that. What is Rajdharm? How the business, the rules have to be conducted, how a state has to be run. All of it is there in the Ramayana. When we come back to Mahabharata, and I will take you back to Bhishma Parv, where, Bhishma Pitama is lying on the Sarshaya, and the battle has finished, and the Pandavas would be coronated in times to come. But at that particular time, Lord Krishna tells Yudhishthira, who would be coronated as the king, he says, you go and walk up to Bhishma Pitama and seek, what is statecraft and how to rule. And he goes there, and Bhishma Pitama tells him the complete nuances of state policy, the responsibilities and the duties of the king, that is the Rajdharm. And if you come down, it is there in it's there in Niti Shastra, it is there in our stories of Panchtantra, and it's not only limited to the north. You can go back to the south and Thiruvalluvar. Everything what is there in the north, there is a connecting line. It's like a string of pearls, and they all have been joined together. So India has a very rich strategic culture, and all of this was documented by none other than the Kautilya, the Chanakya. Everything of this was documented, and I'll just tell you few things. Like today we talk of the dime theory. What are the state instruments of power, or what are the important pillars on which a state lies. The same thing what is being told today in a very modern manner was actually told by the Saptang theory of Kautilya. He mentioned the 7 pillars of the state, in which Jijikshu, that is the king, was the first one. And after that came the Amatya, that is the ministers, his ministers who are his advisors. And then, came the Durg. Then came the Kosh, that is the treasury, the sort of money that is there. So like this, there are 7, which is today articulated by the dime, so that we knew thousands of years back. I'll come to the important Mandala theory of the statecraft as to how a state does its foreign relations. And it states so clearly and unequivocally that your neighbor would be your natural enemy. A lot of people say, no, it is not the right thing. But he's not said that he would be your enemy. He said he would be your natural enemy. अब जैसे आप कहीं रहते हैं पड़ोस में, तो पड़ोस के साथ खटपट हो ही जाती है, अपने पड़ोसी के साथ में. उसी तरह पड़ोसी मुल्क है तो उसके साथ थोड़ी बहुत खटपट होती रहती है. What basically implies is that you have, in the foreign relation, you have to put much more time, effort, resources, to make sure that you have good relations with your neighbors. And it also postulates that your neighbor's neighbor would be your natural ally. So that's where the alliances sort of could be formed. And that is how the concentric circle sort of goes on. He also talks of, large number of other things, but this is not a forum to talk only on Ashatra. I'm sure Shivam has number of other arrows. I just gave you two examples, and I would once again reiterate, I think it's very important for us today to know about India's strategic culture. Not only to know about India's strategic culture, but I think to implement it. And your action should be guided by that, strategic culture which has evolved over last 5,000 years.
Absolutely, sir. You'll be happy to know that we are hosting a session on India's ancient wisdom tomorrow at 12 p.m. If that interests you, please be here for that session as well. My last question to you, Mr. Gokhale, is in the context of the World Book Fair that we are at the moment, sir, and the theme this year is India's military heritage. How can books, podcasts, and long-form storytelling make complex themes like emerging technology or Atmanirbharta in defense more accessible for the public?
Well, I think books play. I think earlier Chief of Naval Staff mentioned this when he was here, and I've been a writer myself. I've written more than a dozen books, and I feel books bring a knowledge, a vast ocean of knowledge, which you otherwise would not be able to access. Your internet does not give you the same kind of, I would say, knowledge or the access to some of the stories that are in the books. Why do you read books? Why do you want hard copies of the books? Because it gives you stories from the ancient times which did not have. Sorry. I'm getting a hiccup here. Thank you. So, why I was saying the books are important, why World Book Fair is important. Thank you. Well, book fair is important because books give you knowledge which cannot be translated or which cannot be put onto internet, and you'll have to search. But a book will give you everything together. Now that is something that you have to keep in mind, and I'm glad that I can see footfalls of young generation in the book fair. I sort of went around a bit, and I think India is the only country, perhaps, which has such large audience for hard copies of books.
You should come on the weekend, sir. You should come on the weekend and see the crowd. I'm happy to see that as well.
I know, and if somebody is saying that they're coming here for only for chole bhature, it's not right. They're coming actually for an intellectual fair and intellectual food for thought, which the books provide. And I think you won't get any other medium which will give you so much knowledge. I think that's the theme of the World Book Fair. Really.
Absolutely.
If I may add to what Nitin is saying, it's very important if you look from an author's perspective. I've already penned down 3 books. If you can say anything, you can talk for the whole day. But when you have to bring pen to paper, you yourself would realize that it's very difficult to start, not even to start, let alone finish a book. And somebody puts pen to paper and, writes a whole book of couple of 100 pages. Imagine the labor, the effort, and the research that goes behind a book. And most of us get this, labor, research, and this profound work maybe for a couple of 100 rupees. So imagine that kind of a knowledge comes to you only for a couple of 100 rupees. And that's why it's very important. In my assessment, a society that reads will prosper. And a society that does not read will actually decay in times to come. So it's very important for us at this time when we are looking at India 2047 to become a developed country, to become a power of significance. It's very important for the youth, for the young generation to start reading. Unfortunately today, while I'm very happy to see the footfall, but if you just look at the statistics, our reading is about 1.7 books per year. Whereas if you compare it with, let's say, Germany or let's say Israel, it is good about more than 50 books 1 year. I think all of us, and especially the youth, I think this is a message that I personally would like to give it to you, and I would like to exhort you that please read a book. Where we go wrong is we always feel that there would be a time when I would be sitting in my lawn, and there would be an easy chair and there would be a coffee by my side, and then I will read a book. That time is not going to come. Ask me, I'm 60 plus. That time has not come for me. You have to instill the discipline of reading. And the discipline of reading is select your book. You have to keep it 24 into 7 with us. Wherever you are waiting, you are traveling. And like someone, I think you said correctly before, you sleep. I must read, let's say, 10 pages. That is the discipline of reading. And through this discipline, only you will be able to inculcate this reading habit. And I think I must compliment the organizers for this marvelous, stupendous effort that they have put in bringing about the New Delhi International Book Fair. I think my kudos and my compliments to them.
Absolutely. When you have such distinguished panels with you, there's a number of questions you can ask them. But I'll give this opportunity to you as well to ask any questions to these esteemed panelists, please. Any questions? So, if you could
sir.
introduce yourself as well.
Sir, I am N.K. Uprati. I am a retired employee from SBI. My question is, sir, as a citizen, how can we take the creditable information in the age of the social media, especially in the time of the war? Please.
Yes, sir. I think I'll take that. Yeah. Sir, you asked a very relevant question, and it's a difficult answer that there's a lot of difficulty I have in giving that answer because we have a mushroom growth of so many mediums, so many television channels, so many newspapers, and social media, of course. But what I urge you, if you have to get the credible information, don't jump to conclusions. With the first information that comes to you, wait to absorb it, check it, cross-check it, maybe with another source, another information, and double-check it. Only then forward it if we want to on WhatsApp. Our disease in India today has been forwarded as received, which is not a good thing to happen. Therefore, I would think you can choose, say, 3 or 4 different mediums and then cross-check whether they are saying the same thing or not. Don't depend on 1 or 2 sources of information. That is the way to do it in today's world.
And in the time of AI, we're going to see more of this. There's going to be less of truth and more of false information. So you got to, the smart person is the one who recognized facts and the truth. So next question for you.
So thank you so much. Wonderful panel discussions, very insightful. A lot of new perspectives are emerged, especially with regard to AI and the way world is evolving. Though AI, of course, is an enabler, but we also know it has got plenty of challenges. I'm not going to go into that, but my question is to General AK sir, with regard to the India's strategic orientation from the point of view of number one, theater command. Of course, you mentioned on that, but also dwelling on the aspect of, as a country, have we got onto that stage where we are able to put our foot and declare it to the world that yes, as theater command operates, we'll be able to come in any direction, we'll be able to take on that challenge.
Thank you. I think it's a very important question that you have asked. And you know what is the debate going as far as the theater commands are concerned. You look at the world over. You look at the militaries which are modern, which are powerful militaries. And if you look at their organization structure, you will find that definitely the integration has to be there. The theaterization has to come. You have to look it not in sum total, but you have to look it as a whole. So it's very important in my assessment. It's extremely important for India to take these steps and to have the theater commands. And a lot of exceedingly good work has been done by the headquarter IDS, by our first Chief of Defence Staff, General Bipin Rawat. He set the stage, he set the ball rolling. And I can say that General Anil Chauhan, the present Chief of Defence Staff, has been able to do monumental work, right from the jointness, because he said, you can't straight away jump onto integration. It's very, very important for us to firstly have jointness. So we have taken those steps, in last several years in enhancing the jointness Like we have the joint logistics, in most of the stations. Earlier, all the three services had their own logistics. Today, we have the joint logistics. And in times to come, when the theater commands come, look at, I'm from 11 Gurkhas, so I say that 1 and 1 for me is not 2. 1 and 1 for me is 11. And 1 plus 1 plus 1 would be triple 1. It's 111. So I think the sum total is always much greater than, the independent this thing of the sub constituents. So in my assessment, I think we are rightly placed today. And especially when you look at the geopolitical situation all around, Sindhu did not give you any notice at all. Something would happen, and we've said already, our Honorable Prime Minister has already mentioned that this is a pause. If this is a pause, the armed forces have to be absolutely ready. We cannot wait for an event to come and then start planning. At this particular time, we have to be ready in all respect, to take absolute credible action. And it can only happen when we have the complete constituents, sort of integrated absolutely perfectly. If you are integrated in peace, you will be able to deliver in peace. So I think the sum total is we are absolutely rightly placed, and the Indian armed forces are mature to take this logical step.
We are on the subject of jointness, and we were to be joined by the Chief of Indian Defence Staff, Air Marshal Ashutosh Dikshit. But since he just messaged his regret, we have more time for you guys to ask questions from these thinkers. Please take this opportunity.
Hi, my name is Sachin Verma, and I'm a private employee working in a US-based bank. My question is precisely to Lieutenant General A.K. Singh, sir. With so much of tensions around the geopolitics that we are hearing nowadays, so much of activities happening in the North Atlantic Ocean, right? So much of happening around the metal wars, gold, silver, and then the sources and the reasons of procurement. And every channel is kind of talking that there could be hidden potential of a World War III. What's your thought around this, and what's the possibility that you and Mr. Nitin sense with so much of the current, I would say, every moment changing dynamics in the geopolitical scenario in the world?
I think that's a very interesting question that you have asked, Sachin. Definitely, the geopolitics is in a state of flux. And I would in fact state that there was a system in place over, last several decades. And somehow we are sort of seeing the collapse of that system. And when the collapse take place, there would be a churning. So I think as I look at it today, there is a churning. And when there is a churning, it's extremely important for the countries. How do you take care of this churning, and how do you make sure that you maintain that strategic autonomy and you maintain that peace? If you look today, most of the area, whether it is Africa, Middle East, West Asia, or Europe, there has been some kind of a conflict, some kind of a tensions that have been. But if you look around, I think India has been one aberration, and the right aberration, that we relatively enjoy a period of peace. I think it's very important for us today, and that's why I commend you that you, as a citizen, you have asked the right question, that how do we prepare for any eventuality to come, because it can happen. We have, today our borders, both with Pakistan and with China, are unsettled. With Pakistan some part, but with China, most of the border is unsettled. So we have an issue, and China is a great military power today. And Pakistan has been needling us over a period of time. You know what has happened in Bangladesh, and we know how things are happening, let's say even in Nepal, the Chinese footprints that are increasing in Nepal. So we today, India faces, and also the internal issues that we have. So I think if I have to say, I would go back to our Rashtrakavi, Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, and he mentioned, Shama Shobhati usi bhujang ko, jiske paas garal ho, uska kya jo danthin vishrahit vinit saral ho. I think it's very, very important today at this stage, when the geopolitics is in a state of flux, that we have to have that might. It's very, very important today to have very strong armed forces. The strong armed forces itself would be the greatest deterrent, to anybody taking any kind of a, misadventure. And if you have to have a strong armed force, the corollary is you have to have a strong economy. And they're both interrelated. You have the money, you can have, strong armed forces. And a strong armed forces would become someone who would be able to protect our, country so that the economic might continues. So in sum total, I think we are in a good state, but it's very important for us to make sure that on all fronts, whether it is military might, whether it is economy, whether it is water security, whether it is energy security, whether it is semiconductors, whether it is rare earth, precious, they say, and rare earth mineral. I think it's time for us to take note, and it's time for each of the citizen. I think I will come back to the civil military fusion. When only the armed forces are fighting, we are just about, let's say, army is about, about 11 odd lakhs. But when every citizen becomes a soldier and every citizen knows its role in peace as also in war, then we are a nation of an army which is 1.4 billion strong. And when you face a 1.4 billion strong army, I think that no country will dare sort of have a misadventure against that country.
Very well, sir. Got another question here.
My name is Agnostus Theos. I head an organization called the Sixth Chamber of Commerce. I also head another organization called Vikas Bharati. I wanted to avoid this question, but I think it's pertinent to put it across because the work that needs to happen, I suspect it's not happening. I'm glad that you just spoke about internal security under this topic called national security unclassified. So my question is, what is the biggest threat to India and what are we doing about it? And the biggest threat, let me put some facts across. The facts, please go on. So the facts being that in Manipur, our own government has handed over 7,000 arms, 15,000 bombs, and 7 lakh bullets, which have been used against the army personnel itself to kill the army personnel, which is the biggest national internal security threat since independence. And this has been going on for 2.5 years. Still, arms have not been recovered. Still, AFSPA has not been imposed in those parts of the valley where these arms are supposed to be held. Arambai Tengol and Meitei Lupin have now 50,000 plus strong cadre. They are openly opening branches across the country. Delhi was the first place where they opened their branch last year in October. Then they went to Chandigarh. Then they went to Calcutta. Why I know all of this? Because I'm the one who went to the Supreme Court in August 2023, reported this through an intervention application, after which the handover of arms was halted. It was going on for 4 months, but still it continued. And as of official figures are what I've told you, but as per army retired generals, the numbers which have been handed out is 2 to 3 times. So when we have such a national internal security collapse, what does the country look up to? When will the army act? Because the army's role is to take care of every threat, internal and external. My second question, you sir said that economy has to rise for a strong military. If we keep on giving $100 billion to China every year, just in trade deficit, and it passes information to against us to Pakistan, even in Operation Sindoor, and yet we go shake hands with them, we give them our money, we give them our entire economy. How will we ever grow? So do we have our priorities right? And is the army and other institutions doing what it needs? And what will it take for them to wake up and act in national interest?
Thank you. So if you may.
I think, I am very happy that as a citizen, you are asking very pointed questions. And I think I wish that more people think, but let me tell you, India as a country, we always have thrived unity in diversity. Look at India, look at the diversity, look at the challenges, and look at the progress that we have made right from 1947 up to here. When we had absolutely no electricity, when the poverty, was in such rampant, there was absolutely no road. today, I think we have come to a stage where we are right there in the international forum. Uh, I will come to your, sort of issues. You cannot have all your decisions, you take certain decisions. All your decisions, you tell me, I think you do not get all your decisions right. Okay, but that does not mean that you don't decide. It's very, very important to decide. So I think it's more important today, if I have to ask, I think go back to our own, culture and our own Indian strategic culture, which thrived on this pluralism. I think this democracy which is surviving despite, the pluralism that exists in this country. I think it's like, a lighthouse, which is, across the world, that look, here is a country where the democracy is not only surviving, but thriving. Coming back to the internal versus the external threat, we have both the threats. I agree. The external threats are also important, and our internal threats are also equally important. But look at, if you start from let's say from the Northeast, the situation that we faced at the time of independence, and the number of militant groups which were there. And there came a stage nearly when we have been able to take care of most of the issues. Okay. But this migration to a state of normalcy doesn't happen overnight. It definitely will take time. And it can only happen when the population sort of gets as to what is right for them. So it is not, you can't just expect the state only, but there have to be other elements, other constituents, and I would say the population at large. You look at JNK, the situation that was there. I have been to JNK, I have seen when JNK was absolutely perfectly normal. I have seen JNK when the situation sort of started in 89. And I have known JNK when the civil administration had absolutely collapsed. There was no education at all. But look at JNK today. So there are success stories. You cannot get all your decisions right. So I think we are going about in a very, very mature manner. Some of the decisions definitely may go wrong, but I think given the sort of a resolve that the leadership today has, I'm sure that it's a matter of time before we are able to, take over and take control. I'm very happy that Nitin is here. Nitin has reported extensively from the Northeast. So to carry forward or to answer to some of your questions, I will request Nitin to please amplify on that further.
Well, I think it's very difficult. I left Northeast in 2006, so I won't really. I don't have a day-to-day update, but I'm really astonished with the figures that you're giving me. I'll have to check on these figures. I don't think it is. I've lived through a very difficult time in the Northeast. I've reported on the difficult times between 1983 and 2006, when the entire Northeast was full of insurgencies. So it's nothing new that is happening there. What you are referring to as far as specific figures are concerned, I have no clue about this, and I will try and figure this out. But I'm a little skeptical about these figures. As far as China is concerned, no, we are not here in a debate. We are not here in a debate, so I'm not going to get into that. No, that may be, but I'm not willing to believe it. You give me that right, whether to disbelieve it or not. Secondly, on China, if we are dependent on China, if we are giving $100 billion deficit is there, it is not that we have any other option. It's the situation the world over. Every country is today dependent on China in some degree or the other. Yes, we'll have to correct that. But if we think that we are dependent on China, China is also dependent on us. This is a big market. If tomorrow we shut down, when we shut down their apps, they were up in arms. So, it's a mutual dependence. I think we are now moving towards a situation where we will have to be self-dependent, self-reliant. But since we didn't do it earlier, it's going to take some time. The ship of the state is huge. It takes time to turn. When it is decided to turn, it takes time to turn. I think that's what my take on all this will be.
And I think finally, I would say that this is an era when your cooperation, collaboration, conflict are all happening at the same time. So, you have to make sure that you exercise your strategic autonomy. You have to make sure that where you need cooperation, you are cooperating. Where you need to collaborate, you are collaborating. And where you need to, sort of twist and use, any other means, there you are absolutely free to use any other means. Thank you.
So if I may add, the biggest threat to national security, internal and external, currently I know very little about national security, is mindset, our mindset. And that would change if we read more. And we are at the backdrop of the New Delhi World Book Fair. And I would urge you all to get a copy of some book or the other that resonates with you so that we collectively increase our strategic thought.
Finally, I would like to say that our host, he's a young boy, a youth. I'm so happy to see him at this young age. He's questioning a general with about 44 years of service and
43 years
a
of
journalist with nearly
yeah.
43, nearly the same.
Mm.
I think this itself is potent to come. I think if we have youth like him who are so aware, I think it's really hats off. Thank you very much. We have enjoyed this show.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Shravan.
I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Shivam. It was a pleasure to be here.
Quite insightful for me. I'm sure the audience had a lot of takeaways. Thank you very much. Can we have a loud round of applause for them, please?